I recently had a conversation with a local photographer who hasn't been shooting professionally for very long. Their work is solid, but she mentioned she shoots JPEG. I asked why, and she said she wasn't quite sure, but heard that she should be shooting RAW. I agreed and gave her what I hoped were some helpful tips. That conversation reminded me that sometimes we all need to get back to basics. When we talk about RAW and JPEG, what we talk about is the file format that our camera saves to the memory card when we take a picture. There are pros and cons to each, though most professionals choose RAW for some very specific reasons. First, though, let's talk about JPEG. JPEG is a file format that's been around for a long time, and is a standard that can be used in every application I can think of. It was created as an alternative to formats like TIFF and EPS and others that took up their share of disk space. That was the chief benefit of JPEG. It uses an algorithm that compresses data to create a smaller file. In the days when disk space was expensive and the size of hard drives was considerably smaller than what we take for granted now, this was a big advantage. These days, relatively speaking, storage is cheap, which is a good thing because RAW files, they can take up their share of space. When you create an image, the data that describes that image so it can be called up and viewed later is stored on a memory card or a hard drive. Each pixel that makes up that image is assigned a numerical value. The more detailed and larger the image, the more unique pixels there are, and the larger that file will be. The genius of JPEG is that it can look at a series of similar pixels and assign a numerical value to that group rather than to each pixel individually. So if you have a picture of the sky, for example, this group of blue over here is very similar, so it can be described numerically as a chunk of data. And this group of lighter blue over here can be described numerically as another. So instead of the computer going pixel by pixel, it can do it group by group. Fewer lines of code to describe similar things, save space, and results in smaller files. When you save a JPEG in Photoshop, you'll be asked for a compression level. For reference, I saved my JPEGs as level 10 out of 12. That larger number means a larger file size, but it also means higher quality because the chunks of data are smaller. A lower number on the compression level means more data is thrown away, resulting in smaller files, but also a lower image quality. This is because JPEG uses what's called a lossy compression algorithm, meaning data is lost when you use it. The space it's saving by describing chunks of the image instead of individual pixels is simply thrown away. So if you're saving a JPEG level 10, for example, that's going to result in an image that's more or less indistinguishable from its lossless counterpart until you start pixel peeping. If you continue to work on a JPEG, meaning repeatedly opening that file, editing it, saving it, and closing it, that compresses an already compressed file, and it will continue to degrade in quality each time, so it isn't at all a replica of the original. You can try it yourself by taking an existing JPEG and running it through that process. Here's what the original file looks like. Here's what it looks like after I've saved it and closed it 10 times. And here's what it looks like after I've saved it and closed it 20 times. The areas where the tonal values are similar, like the sunset sky, are heavily compressed, and you can easily see banding, which is a visual representation of the algorithm describing chunks of the sky rather than each pixel. It might be difficult to see in the video, but the shadow details are getting noisier too. You see the compression less where there's more unique data like the plants or the couple's faces, because there aren't large areas of similar value like in the sky, but they'll get there eventually. This example is more opening and saving than most people will during their workflow, but it is something to be aware of if you're only using JPEGs. A lot of this background explains how JPEGs work once they're on your computer, not necessarily how they're saved in your camera, but we'll get to that shortly. RAW, on the other hand, is a file format proprietary to each camera manufacturer. Canon has its own version, Nikon its own version, and Sony has its own version. When you take a picture, light travels through the lens, strikes the sensor in the camera where it's converted to data, which is then saved to the memory card. In theory, that data has had nothing applied to it, so you can work on the file later with much more data than you'd have with a JPEG. Cats. Because each camera manufacturer handles raw data differently, colors, dynamic range, sharpness, and noise will vary between brands. Which RAW format is best is a subject of much debate, with pros and cons depending on the brand, and as such is pretty subjective. It's one of the specs people consider when deciding which camera system to invest in. Some people get really spirited about this, but I look at it as all in good fun because at the end of the day, you can make a great photo from any camera once you process it. If you have your camera save images as JPEG, it uses whatever software is inside the camera to lock in characteristics like white balance, exposure, and contrast. That means that whatever the camera captured and processed is the maximum amount of data you'll have to work with, regardless of your workflow afterward. RAW, being unprocessed data, keeps your post-production options open because you have more data to work with. RAW is considered lossless compared to lossy JPEG. With me so far? I've known photographers who nail their exposure so well in camera that they barely need to process afterward. Most of us aren't that adept. I know I'm not. Shooting RAW provides some insurance in case, during family portraits, the sun goes behind a cloud or comes out from behind one if you haven't adjusted your exposure or lighting in the moment. You can later balance out the highlights and shadows as long as they haven't gone too far. The more dynamic range your camera has, the more leeway you'll have when shooting RAW. It can be very much a safety net. Similarly, if you're using off-camera flash during the reception and shooting quickly, the flash might not fully recycle in time before you take the next picture, resulting in underexposure. If you're shooting RAW, you can often bring up the total exposure in post to make it match the rest of the sequence. This may not be as critical in studio photography, but since I photograph weddings and events, it's very important to me. When you begin post-production, whether it's using Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, Capture One, or something else, you have more flexibility with RAW. With a strictly JPEG workflow, you're working with already compressed data. Qualities like white balance are baked in. You can still adjust them, but each change throws away more data. RAW files, being lossless, retain all the data. In Lightroom, for example, when you make adjustments, you're not changing the file, you're creating a recipe for how the image should look when exported. This means you can go back to the original RAW file at any time, make changes, and there's no degradation. You're not saving over and over like with JPEGs. When you crop a RAW file in Lightroom, you always have access to the original file and can readjust that crop. With the JPEG workflow, cropping is destructive. Once cropped, that data is gone. If you later decide you've cropped too tightly or just want to change it, there's nothing you can do to bring back the data you've already cropped out. With a RAW file, it's infinitely adjustable. Future Seth here. In Photoshop, you can use generative expand and use AI to build out the edges of the frame if you've cropped too tightly. That doesn't have anything to do with RAW versus JPEG, but it bears mentioning since we're talking about cropping. It's true that RAW files take up more space on your memory cards and hard drives. Again, storage is as cheap as it's ever been, so while you may need to initially invest in larger hard drives with a RAW workflow, if you buy big enough cards and drives, you'll be set for years. So what do I deliver to my clients? JPEGs. Once I've adjusted the images to my liking in Lightroom, I export them as JPEGs. I may take that file into Photoshop for additional retouching, but I'm only doing so once. Re-JPEGing a single time won't noticeably reduce image quality. When using JPEG as a format to deliver images to clients, it's more than adequate for most uses, including weddings and portraits. More recently, Lightroom allows you to take the RAW file you're working on and bring it into Photoshop without exporting it first. You can use the Remove tool or Generative Fill, for example, to get rid of your assistant or a distracting exit sign. That edited file is then stacked with the original RAW in Lightroom. When you export your finished JPEGs, you can simply send them off to the client. No need to go back into Photoshop for additional editing. Future Seth here again. When you use this technique, Lightroom will then bundle the adjusted files with the original RAW file and create a DNG file. That's something to note, but it isn't anything that affects the main topic of this video. It's been a while since this has come up, but every now and then a client will ask for the RAW files. Delivering them is something I almost never do. The RAW file itself is just data. It's what I do with that data in Lightroom that makes it the photograph I deliver. This final image, that JPEG, is what's consistent with my style and look. If they're interested in the original file they can play around with, that's what the final JPEG is for. That's my photography. A RAW file is not. The baker doesn't give people flour, sugar, and butter. They deliver a cake. A florist doesn't deliver seeds and water and fertilizer. They deliver a bouquet. It's the same with photography. We deliver a finished product, not the ingredients that go into making that product. Frankly, I don't want the RAWs out there because they're not representative of my work. The unprocessed data looks like underexposure over here and overexposure over there, and frames are composed or cropped weirdly, and they just look rough. These files don't become images made by me or made by you until they're processed. If you're one of those people who really knows their stuff and had the experience to shoot JPEGs without needing to process them, I say go for it. The overwhelming majority of professional photographers, though, do shoot RAW. If you're a newer photographer and weren't really clear on the advantages or reasons for doing so, hopefully I've shed a little light on the subject. Any counterpoints out there? I know this is a big topic and there's no way I could have covered everything without this turning into a series, so let me know what else I should have touched on. What else do you think people should know about RAW capture versus shooting JPEG? Let me hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your spending a few minutes with me. If you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to see more videos like this, check out this other one I made for you. This is Ask a Wedding Photographer. I'm Seth K, and I'm here to help.